The morning sky over Seoul turned dark as massive ships blocked out the sun. Kim Tae-ho looked up from his desk at the university library and watched through the tall windows as enormous metal vessels descended from the clouds. They were bigger than anything humans had ever built. Each ship was the size of a mountain, covered in strange symbols that glowed with blue light. Tae-ho pushed his glasses up his nose and closed the old book he was reading. The book was about ancient Korean military tactics from 1,000 years ago. He had been working on his research paper about how old generals won battles against larger armies. Now it seemed like such work might become very important. The alien ships landed in empty fields around the city. People ran through the streets, some screaming, others taking pictures with their phones. The military arrived quickly, surrounding the landing sites with tanks and soldiers. But everyone knew the weapons were useless. These ships had crossed the galaxy to reach Earth. Human technology was like throwing rocks at a steel wall. 3 hours after the ships landed, the aliens made contact. They sent a message to every television, radio, and computer on Earth at the same time. The message was in perfect Korean, English, Chinese, and every other human language. "People of Earth," the voice said. It was deep and cold like metal scraping against stone. "I am Kral Vorthak, commander of the Galactic Council Fleet. We come to offer you a choice." Tae-ho watched the broadcast on the library's old television. The other librarians had gone home, but he stayed to watch. He always stayed late anyway. Books were better company than most people. "Your species has reached the stage where you must join the galactic community," Kral Vorthak continued. "For thousands of years we have given new species the same opportunity. You will send us your strongest warrior. This warrior will fight our champion in honorable combat. If your warrior wins, your world joins the Galactic Council as an equal member. If your warrior loses, your world becomes a territory under our protection." The word protection sounded like a threat when Kral Vorthak said it. "You have 72 hours to choose your champion and deliver them to our ship." This is not a request. This is law. This is how things have always been done. The broadcast ended and the world went crazy. Tae-ho turned off the television and sat in the quiet library. Outside, he could hear sirens and shouting. The aliens had given humanity 3 days to pick someone to fight for the entire planet. He thought about the book he had been reading. In the old stories, small armies often beat large ones by using smart tactics instead of brute force. But this was different. This was one person against an alien warrior who had probably never lost a fight. The next morning, Tae-ho walked to work through streets full of protesters and news crews. The government had declared a state of emergency. Military bases around the world were testing their strongest soldiers. Everyone was talking about who should represent humanity. At the library, Tae-ho found a surprise waiting for him. Park Soo-jin, the defense minister, was sitting at his desk with 2 bodyguards. She was a small woman with sharp eyes and gray hair pulled back in a tight bun. She looked tired, like she had not slept since the aliens arrived. "Mr. Kim Tae-ho?" she asked, standing up when she saw him. "Yes, that's me," he said, confused. "Can I help you?" "I hope so," Minister Park said. "I need to talk to you about military history." She explained that the government was trying to understand what they were facing. The aliens had sent more information during the night. They provided videos of previous fights between their champion and warriors from other worlds. All the other warriors had lost. All their worlds were now under alien control. 17 worlds, Minister Park said. 17 different species. Some were stronger than humans. Some were faster. Some were smarter. All of them lost. She showed Tae-ho the videos on a tablet. The alien champion was called Zextar the Bone Crusher. He was 3 meters tall, covered in scales like a crocodile with arms as thick as tree trunks. In every video, Zextar killed his opponent within minutes. "Our best choice is General Lee Dong-woo," Minister Park said. "He has won more battles than any soldier alive. He has trained his whole life for combat, but even he might not be enough." Tae-ho studied the videos carefully. He watched how Zextar moved, how he attacked, how he finished his opponents. "Minister," he said slowly, "have you noticed that all these fights follow the same pattern?" Minister Park leaned forward. "What do you mean?" "The alien always wins the same way. He uses his strength to overpower his opponent quickly, but look at the arena." Tae-ho pointed at the screen. "It changes during the fight. The ground shifts. The environment becomes different. None of the other warriors adapted to these changes. You think the arena is the key?" "Maybe," Tae-ho said. In ancient warfare, generals who understood the battlefield always had an advantage over stronger armies. Minister Park stared at him for a long moment. You study military history, don't you? It's my specialty. Ancient tactics, strategy, psychological warfare. I've read every military text ever written, from Sun Tzu to modern combat manuals. But you're not a fighter. Taeho shook his head. I'm just a librarian. I read about wars. I don't fight them. Minister Park thanked him and left with her bodyguards. Taeho spent the rest of the day reading everything he could find about the alien challenge. The more he learned, the more worried he became. This was not just about fighting. This was about survival. That evening, disaster struck. General Lee Dongwoo was training with his Special Forces team when an equipment failure caused a terrible accident. A training robot malfunctioned and attacked the general with full force. Lee fought bravely, but the robot's metal fists crushed his spine. The doctor said he would never walk again, let alone fight. Taeho heard the news on the radio while organizing books in the library basement. Earth's strongest warrior was broken. In 24 hours, the aliens would come to collect humanity's champion. But who could they send now? His phone rang. It was Minister Park. Mr. Kim, she said, and her voice was shaking. I need to see you right away. An hour later, Taeho sat in a government car racing through the empty streets of Seoul. Minister Park sat beside him, her face pale in the passing streetlights. We have no choice, she said. Every other top soldier is either too old, too young, or not skilled enough. The aliens won't accept delays. They've made that very clear. But surely someone else. There is no one else, Minister Park said firmly. You understand warfare better than anyone we've consulted. You've studied every type of combat that ever existed. You know how to analyze an enemy and find their weaknesses. Taeho felt sick. Minister, I've never fought anyone in my life. I wouldn't last 10 seconds against that monster. Maybe not in a straight fight, she said. But you might find another way. You said it yourself. Generals who understand the battlefield have advantages. The car stopped at a military base. Through the windows, Taeho could see the alien ship in the distance, glowing against the night sky. It looked like a sleeping dragon waiting to devour the world. I can't order you to do this, Minister Park said quietly. It has to be your choice. But if you say no, we'll have to send someone who will definitely lose, and then Earth becomes their territory. Taeho thought about his books, his quiet life, his research into ancient battles. He thought about the 17 worlds that had already fallen. He thought about what would happen to humanity if they became slaves to the Galactic Council. If I agree, he said slowly, I want access to all the information you have about the aliens. Every video, every report, every detail about their champion and their arena. Minister Park nodded. Done. And I want 24 hours to study everything. You'll have it. Taeho took a deep breath. Then I'll do it. As the car drove toward the base, Taeho looked up at the alien ship and wondered if he had just agreed to save the world or to die in the most public way possible. Tomorrow he would stop being a librarian and become Earth's last hope. He just hoped that 30 years of reading about war would be enough to win one. The alien ship was even bigger up close. Taeho stood at the bottom of the metal ramp that led into the vessel, holding his worn leather bag against his chest. Inside the bag were his notebooks, 3 ancient military books and a small tablet computer. Everything he owned that might help him survive the next few hours. Minister Park stood beside him with a group of military officers. They all looked nervous. Behind them, news cameras filmed everything for the entire world to see. Billions of people were watching a librarian walk toward what would probably be his death. Remember, Minister Park whispered, you have the right to ask questions about the rules. Use that time to learn everything you can. Taeho nodded. His hands were shaking, but not from fear. He had spent the whole night reading about the alien arena and watching videos of previous fights. His mind was full of ideas and theories. Fear would come later. Right now, he was focused on solving a puzzle. The ramp led into a bright white corridor. Alien guards waited for them. The guards were tall and thin, with gray skin and large black eyes. They wore no armor but carried weapons that looked like metal sticks. Taeho guessed the weapons were more dangerous than they appeared. You are the human champion? One guard asked. His voice came from a small device on his chest that translated his words into Korean. I am, Taeho said. The guard looked at him for a long moment. Then he made a sound that might have been laughter. Follow. They walked through corridors filled with strange technology. The walls showed moving pictures of space battles and conquered worlds. Tejo tried to memorize everything he saw. Information was his only weapon. The corridor opened into a massive room with a clear dome ceiling. Through the dome, Tejo could see Earth hanging in space like a blue marble. The sight made him dizzy. He had never been in space before. Few humans had. At the center of the room stood Krell Vorthak. He was even more frightening in person than on television. His skin was dark red, covered in raised scars that formed patterns across his face and arms. His eyes were yellow like a cat's eyes, but cold and cruel. He was twice as tall as Tejo and probably 4 times as heavy. "So," Krell Vorthak said, his voice echoing in the large room, "humanity sends us a scholar." Other aliens filled the room. Some looked like Krell Vorthak with red skin and yellow eyes. Others were completely different. Some covered in fur, some with multiple arms, some that floated in the air without legs. All of them stared at Tejo like he was an interesting insect. "I am Tejo," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "I represent Earth in the trial of combat." Krell Vorthak laughed, and the sound was like rocks falling down a mountain. "You are not a warrior. You are weak, small. This is an insult to the Galactic Council." "The rules say I must be human," Tejo replied. "They do not say I must be large." An alien with silver skin and no visible mouth stepped forward. When it spoke, the words appeared in the air as glowing letters. "I am High Arbitrator Velthus. I oversee all trials to ensure fairness. The human speaks correctly. Size is not mentioned in the ancient laws." Krell Vorthak's eyes narrowed. "Fine, but your death will be swift, little scholar." "Perhaps that is mercy." High Arbitrator Velthus led Tejo to a platform that rose up from the floor. Around them, the room began to change. The walls became transparent, showing rows and rows of seats filled with aliens, thousands of them, all waiting to watch a human die. "Before the trial begins," Velthus said, "you may examine the arena and ask questions about the rules. This is your right under galactic law." The floor in the center of the room opened up, revealing a massive space below. Tejo looked down into what would become his battlefield. It was currently empty, just a flat gray surface about the size of a football field, but he could see machinery around the edges waiting to transform the space. "How many different environments can the arena create?" Tejo asked. 12 primary configurations," Velthus replied. "Desert, forest, mountain, swamp, Arctic, volcanic, urban ruins, underwater chambers, floating platforms, gravity wells, magnetic storms, and quantum flux fields." Tejo wrote everything down in his notebook. Some of the aliens laughed when they saw him taking notes. They thought he was wasting time with useless preparation. "How often does the environment change during battle?" "Every 8 to 12 minutes, depending on the combat intensity." "The arena responds to violence and excitement," Tejo nodded. That explained why all the previous champions had lost quickly. The more aggressively they fought, the faster the arena changed, putting them off balance. "What weapons are allowed?" "Any weapon you bring with you." "Any weapon you find in the arena." "Any improvised weapon you create from available materials." "What about the champion I will face?" Krell Vorthak gestured toward a side entrance. "Zextar the Bone Crusher will arrive soon. He has fought in 47 trials and won 47 times. He has killed representatives from 17 worlds." As if summoned by his name, Zextar entered the viewing area. Tejo had seen him in videos, but nothing could have prepared him for the reality. The alien champion was a living nightmare. His body was covered in thick green scales that looked harder than steel. His arms ended in claws that could tear through metal. His head was like a crocodile's but larger, with teeth the size of kitchen knives. Zextar roared when he saw Tejo, and the sound made the entire ship vibrate. Several aliens in the audience roared back in approval. "He is hungry for battle," Krell Vorthak said with satisfaction. "And hungry for human meat." Tejo forced himself to study Zextar calmly. The champion was built for power and speed, but he was also very large. Large creatures had weaknesses. They needed more energy. They had trouble with quick changes of direction. They relied on intimidation as much as strength. "May I access the galactic database to learn about previous trials?" Tejo asked. The aliens looked surprised. Most champions spent their preparation time exercising or meditating or praying. None had ever asked to do research. "This is unusual," Velthus said, "but it is not forbidden. You may access historical records of trials." They gave Tejo a small alien device that projected information into the air in front of him. He spent the next 2 hours reading everything he could find about the Galactic Council's system of conquest. What he discovered made him angry. The trials were not about finding strong warriors. They were about humiliation. The Council always chose arena environments that favored their champion. They always gave just enough hope to make the defeat more crushing. 17 worlds had fallen because their champions tried to fight like heroes instead of thinking like generals. But Taeho also found something else in the old records. Hidden in the legal documents, written in an ancient language that the modern aliens barely understood, were the original rules of trial by combat, rules that had been forgotten over thousands of years. His brother Choi Minho called him on his communicator just before the trial was scheduled to begin. "Taeho," Minho said, his voice full of worry. "The whole world is watching. Everyone is praying for you." "Don't pray for me to win," Taeho said quietly. "Pray for me to be smart." He looked up at the viewing area where thousands of aliens waited for entertainment. They expected to see a weak human destroyed by their invincible champion. They expected Earth to join the collection of conquered worlds. Taeho thought about his library back home. He thought about all the books written by generals who had faced impossible odds. Sun Tzu, who taught that all warfare was based on deception. Hannibal, who crossed the Alps when everyone said it was impossible. Yi Sun Sin, who defeated a Japanese fleet 300 times larger than his own force. None of those generals had won through strength alone. They had won by understanding their enemies and using that knowledge to turn weakness into advantage. "Human champion," Velthus announced. "Prepare for trial by combat." Taeho closed his notebook and put it back in his bag. Then he walked to the platform that would lower him into the arena. As he descended, he heard Zextar roar again, and the sound of thousands of aliens cheering for his death. But he also heard something else. Through his communicator, he could hear the voices of every human on Earth, all hoping that a quiet librarian could somehow save their world. The platform reached the bottom of the arena. Taeho stood alone on the gray floor, waiting for the battle to begin. Above him, Zextar was being lowered on his own platform, flexing his claws and snarling with anticipation. The arena began to change around them. The flat gray surface shifted and rose, becoming rocky ground under a blazing artificial sun. Sand scattered across the rocks and the temperature rose quickly. The first environment was desert. Just as Taeho had expected, High Arbitrator Velthus's voice echoed through the arena. "Let the trial begin." Zextar roared and charged toward Taeho like a living tank. The battle for Earth had started. Taeho ran. He ran as fast as his legs could carry him across the rocky desert floor, while Zextar charged behind him like an angry mountain. The alien champion's claws scraped against the stone, sending sparks flying through the hot air. The audience above roared with laughter. They had seen this before. The weak champion runs away while the strong one hunts them down. It was always the same story, and it always ended the same way. But Taeho was not running in panic. He was running with purpose. While Zextar chased him, Taeho studied the arena. He looked at the rocks, the sand, the artificial sun overhead. He memorized the layout of the space and the position of the machinery around the edges. Zextar was fast for his size, but Taeho was smaller and could change direction quickly. When the alien champion swung his massive claws, Taeho was already somewhere else. When Zextar tried to grab him, Taeho slipped away like water. "Stand and fight, coward." Zextar roared, his voice echoing off the arena walls. Taeho did not answer. He was too busy thinking. In ancient warfare, the general who controlled the battlefield controlled the battle. Right now, Zextar thought he was the hunter and Taeho was the prey. But Taeho was learning to use the arena itself as his weapon. He led Zextar toward a cluster of tall rocks. When the alien champion followed, Taeho suddenly stopped and rolled to the side. Zextar could not stop his charge in time. He crashed into the rocks with tremendous force, sending stone fragments flying everywhere. The impact would have killed a human, but Zextar just shook his head and looked around for Taeho. His scales had protected him from injury, but he was angrier now. Anger made him careless. "Clever," Taeho said from behind another rock. "But you hit harder than you think." Zextar spun around, but Taeho was already moving again. The librarian had noticed something important. When Zextar hit the rocks, dust and sand had fallen on his scales. The desert environment was not just decoration. It was designed to affect the fighters. Taeho continued to move around the arena. always staying just out of reach. He picked up handfuls of sand and threw them at Zextar's eyes. The alien champion swiped the sand away easily, but it slowed him down and made him blink. From the viewing area above, Kral Vorthak watched with growing irritation. This was taking too long. The human should be dead by now. Why does he not attack? Kral Vorthak demanded. High Arbitrator Velthus studied the battle with interest. He is learning. No previous champion has spent time studying the arena during combat. Learning will not save him when Zextar catches him. Down in the arena, Teho was indeed learning. He had discovered that the artificial sun was not just for light. It was heating the metal surfaces around the arena. The rocks were getting hotter. Even the sand was warming up. More importantly, he had figured out the arena's pattern. Every environment was designed to give Zextar advantages, but those same advantages could be turned against him if someone was smart enough to see how. 8 minutes had passed since the battle began. Right on schedule, the arena started to change. The desert sand began to shift and move. The rocks sank into the ground. Trees rose up from hidden panels in the floor. Vines dropped down from the ceiling. Within minutes, the arena had become a thick jungle. The audience cheered. They loved watching the arena transform. It made the battles more exciting, but Teho had been expecting this change. He had already positioned himself near where he knew a large tree would appear. As the jungle formed around him, he climbed up into the branches and disappeared from view. Zextar found himself surrounded by thick plants and hanging vines. His size, which had been an advantage in the open desert, was now a problem. He had to push through the vegetation, making noise and leaving a clear trail. Teho moved through the treetops like a quiet shadow. He had read about ancient Korean warriors who used forests to defeat larger armies. The key was patience and positioning. From his hiding place, Teho watched Zextar thrash through the jungle below. The alien champion was getting frustrated. He started tearing down trees and crushing plants, trying to flush out his opponent. "Where are you, little coward?" Zextar bellowed. "Show yourself." Teho dropped a piece of fruit on Zextar's head. The alien champion looked up angrily, but Teho was already gone, swinging to another tree on a vine. Nam Jiwoo, Earth's communication specialist, was watching from the government command center. She spoke into her headset, knowing that Teho could hear her through his earpiece. "Teho, you're doing great, but you need to find a way to actually hurt him. Running away won't win this." Teho heard her, but he did not reply. He could not waste energy on talking. Besides, he was not just running away. He was setting a trap. He had noticed something about the jungle environment. The vines were not just decoration. They were strong enough to support his weight, which meant they were strong enough to bind something heavy. Teho began moving in a specific pattern through the trees, collecting vines as he went. He tied them together using knots he had learned from reading about ancient siege tactics. Slowly, carefully, he constructed a web of rope among the branches. Zextar continued to destroy the jungle below, getting angrier and more careless with each passing minute. He was so focused on finding Teho that he did not notice the pattern of his own movements. Teho was herding him, like a shepherd guides sheep toward a specific location. When Zextar reached the center of the trap, Teho dropped down from above. But instead of attacking, he landed on the alien champion's back and immediately jumped away. Zextar spun around to grab him, but his claws caught in the vines that Teho had strung between the trees. The more Zextar struggled, the more tangled he became. The vines were designed to be flexible, so they bent instead of breaking. Soon the alien champion was wrapped up like a giant insect in a spider's web. The audience fell silent. This had never happened before. Zextar roared in fury and began tearing at the vines with his teeth. He was strong enough to break free, but it would take time. Time that Teho used to study his opponent more carefully. Up close, Teho could see that Zextar's scales were not uniform. They were smaller and softer around the joints, the elbows, knees, and neck. Those were the weak points that Teho needed to remember. Yoon Haijin, the military strategist watching from Earth, spoke into the communication system. "Excellent tactical thinking, Teho. You're using the environment exactly like an asymmetric warfare specialist." Teho still did not reply, but he smiled slightly. All those years of reading military history were finally useful for something other than academic papers. Zextar broke free from the vines just as the arena began to change again. The jungle dissolved away. replaced by a rocky mountain landscape with narrow paths and steep cliffs. Cold wind blew through the space and snow began to fall. This was the third environment, and Tae-ho was ready for it. He had spent his preparation time memorizing all 12 possible configurations. He knew exactly how to use each one. The mountain terrain favored speed and agility over brute strength. Tae-ho immediately began climbing toward the higher ground, using handholds in the rock face. Zexitar followed, but his heavy body made climbing difficult. "You cannot run forever," Zexitar snarled as he pulled himself up the cliff face. "Eventually you will make a mistake." "You're right," Tae-ho called down to him. "But the question is, who will make the first mistake?" Tae-ho had positioned himself on a narrow ledge above a steep drop. When Zexitar climbed up to reach him, Tae-ho kicked loose a pile of rocks. The stones tumbled down, striking Zexitar in the head and shoulders. The rocks could not hurt the alien champion seriously, but they knocked him off balance. Zexitar slipped and fell 20 feet before his claws caught on another ledge. He pulled himself up, roaring with anger, but something had changed. For the first time since the battle began, Zexitar looked uncertain. He had expected an easy victory, but this small human kept slipping away and turning the arena against him. In the viewing area, the alien audience was growing restless. This was not the quick, brutal fight they had come to expect. Some of them began to mutter complaints. Kral Vorthak's yellow eyes blazed with fury. "End this, Zexitar! Kill the human now!" But Zexitar was beginning to realize that killing Tae-ho might not be as simple as he had thought. The human was weak, but he was also smart. And in a changing battlefield, intelligence could be more dangerous than strength. As the mountain environment prepared to shift into something new, Tae-ho looked down at his opponent and smiled. He was no longer afraid. He was starting to understand exactly how to win this fight. The real battle was just beginning. The mountain environment melted away like ice in summer. In its place, a swamp rose from the arena floor. Thick mud bubbled up through hidden vents. Dark water filled the low areas. Twisted trees with hanging moss created a maze of shadows and hiding places. Tae-ho landed softly on a fallen log that floated in the murky water. He had been expecting this change. The swamp was the fourth environment on his list, and he had already planned how to use it. Zexitar crashed down into the mud with a tremendous splash. The thick, wet ground immediately began to slow his movements. Each step required effort as his massive weight sank into the soft earth. "This ends now," Zexitar roared, but his voice sounded different, less confident. He was breathing harder than before, and sweat dripped from his scales despite the cool, damp air. Tae-ho jumped from log to log, staying above the water. He had noticed something important during their fight. Zexitar was getting tired. The alien champion was built for quick, powerful attacks, not for long battles. Every minute that passed made him weaker. "You know," Tae-ho said, balancing on a thick branch. "I've been thinking about something." Zexitar struggled through the mud toward him. "Thinking will not save you. I've been thinking about why the Galactic Council really uses these trials." Tae-ho spoke loudly enough that his voice carried to the viewing area above. "It's not about finding strong warriors, is it?" High Arbitrator Velthas leaned forward in his seat. This was unusual. Champions did not normally engage in conversation during combat. Zexitar lunged toward Tae-ho's branch, but his feet slipped in the mud, and he fell face first into the swamp water. He came up spitting and angrier than ever. "It's about breaking the spirit of new species," Tae-ho continued, jumping to another tree. "You make them send their best warrior, then you crush that warrior in front of everyone. After that, the whole species loses hope." Some of the aliens in the audience shifted uncomfortably. They did not like hearing their methods discussed so openly. Kral Vorthak stood up from his seat. "Silence. This is trial by combat, not a debate." But Tae-ho was not finished. "The problem is you've been using the same system for so long that you've forgotten the original rules. The real rules." He pulled out his notebook, which he had kept dry inside a waterproof case. "I found something interesting in your galactic database. The very first laws about trial by combat, written in ancient Velthari script." High Arbitrator Velthas made a sound of surprise. "You can read ancient Velthari?" "I'm a librarian," Tae-ho said simply. "I can read 17 dead languages. And according to the original law, trial by combat was never meant for territorial conquest. It was only for resolving disputes between equal members of the galactic community." The arena fell silent except for the sound of Zextar struggling through the mud and the bubbling of the swamp. Water. That means, Tejo continued, every world you've conquered in the last 1,000 years was taken illegally. You've been violating your own laws. Elder Mordak, an ancient alien who rarely spoke, suddenly stood up in the viewing area. His voice was like wind through dry leaves. The human speaks truth. I remember the old ways. This is not how things should be. Kral Vorthak's face turned darker red. The old laws are dead. We follow new ways now. Galactic law doesn't work that way, Tejo said. He opened his notebook and began reading. According to Section 12 of the Fundamental Codes, no law may be changed or ignored unless formally amended by unanimous vote of all member species. When was that vote taken? No one answered. Zextar had finally reached the tree where Tejo was perched. With a mighty roar, he began tearing at the trunk with his claws, trying to bring the whole thing down. But something was wrong with the alien champion. His movements were slower now and his breathing was labored. The long chase through multiple environments was taking its toll. Tejo jumped to safety just as the tree crashed into the swamp. As he landed on another log, he noticed that Zextar's scales were changing color slightly. Instead of bright green, they were becoming duller, more gray. Back on Earth, Seo Hyunwoo, the legal expert, was frantically searching through databases in his office. He spoke into his communicator, knowing Tejo could hear him. Tejo, you're right about the ancient laws. I'm finding more evidence. There's a clause about something called the right of scholastic challenge. If you can prove legal violations, you can demand a different kind of trial. Tejo smiled. He had found that clause too, buried deep in the old records. High Arbitrator Velthas, he called out, I invoke the right of scholastic challenge. The entire arena went silent. Even Zextar stopped his attacks and looked up in confusion. Velthas stood slowly. The right of scholastic challenge has not been invoked in over 3,000 years. But it still exists in the law, Tejo said firmly. And I qualify to use it. I have presented evidence of legal violations by the Galactic Council. According to the ancient codes, this gives me the right to challenge the Council's authority through intellectual demonstration rather than physical combat. Kral Vorthak was shaking with rage. This is impossible. The trial has already begun. The ancient law takes precedence over modern customs, Elder Mordak said, his old voice carrying surprising authority. The human may invoke this right if he can prove his claim. But Zextar was not finished fighting. With a roar of fury, he launched himself toward Tejo's position. The alien champion's pride would not let him accept that this battle might end any way other than with the human's death. Tejo had been expecting this. As Zextar flew through the air toward him, Tejo did something that surprised everyone, including himself. Instead of running away, he ran directly toward the alien champion. At the last second, Tejo dropped down and slid between Zextar's legs. The alien champion's own momentum carried him forward into a massive tree trunk. But this time, Tejo had led him to exactly the right spot. The tree that Zextar hit was one of the arena's control mechanisms, disguised to look like part of the environment. When the alien champion's full weight struck it, the tree cracked and sparked with electrical energy. Zextar cried out in pain as electricity coursed through his wet scales. He was not seriously injured, but he was stunned and confused. For the first time in 47 battles, the mighty champion fell to his knees. Tejo stood over him, breathing hard but victorious. I didn't defeat you with strength, he said quietly. I defeated you by making you defeat yourself. Your own anger and pride led you into every trap. In the viewing area, the alien audience was in chaos. Some were cheering, others were arguing, and many were simply staring in disbelief. Their invincible champion had been brought down by a human who had never thrown a punch. Kang Yijin, the historian working with Earth's research team, spoke through the communicator. Tejo, we've found more evidence. There are 17 species that should never have been conquered. The whole council system is built on illegal expansion. High Arbitrator Velthas raised his hand for silence. The physical trial is concluded. The human champion has proven his superiority through tactics and intelligence. But he has also invoked the right of scholastic challenge. This matter must now be brought before the full Galactic Council for judgment. Zextar struggled to his feet, his scales still smoking slightly from the electrical shock. He looked at Tejo with something that might have been respect mixed with confusion. No one had ever defeated him by making him think before attacking. How? The alien champion asked quietly. I read about you, Tejo said. I studied every battle you ever fought. You always win the same way. with overwhelming force and intimidation. But you never learn to adapt when your opponents don't play by your rules. Kral Vorthak stepped forward, his yellow eyes blazing. This changes nothing. One human cannot challenge the authority of the entire Galactic Council. Actually, said a new voice, he can. Everyone turned to see Rilvok, a sympathetic alien official, entering the arena. He was tall and thin with blue skin and kind eyes. I have been reviewing the legal codes during this trial. The human is correct. The right of scholastic challenge is still valid law. Tejo picked up his notebook and looked around the arena. The swamp environment was beginning to fade as the machinery shut down. But he was not done yet. He had won the physical battle, but the real fight was just beginning. Honorable Arbitrator, he said formally, I request immediate transportation to the Galactic Council chambers. I have evidence that will prove the last 1,000 years of conquests were illegal under your own laws. Velthus nodded slowly. The request is granted. But understand, human, if you fail to prove your case, your world will face consequences far worse than simple conquest. Tejo closed his notebook and smiled. I understand, but I'm not planning to fail. As guards moved to escort him from the arena, Tejo looked back at Zextar one last time. The mighty champion was staring at him with an expression that was almost curious. Learn to think before you attack, Tejo called to him. It might save your life someday. The arena doors closed behind them, and Tejo found himself walking toward what would either be humanity's greatest victory or its final defeat. The Galactic Council chamber was the largest room Tejo had ever seen. It was shaped like a massive bowl, with thousands of seats arranged in circles going up toward a domed ceiling that showed the stars beyond. Representatives from hundreds of different alien species sat in those seats, all watching the small human who had requested an emergency session. Tejo stood in the center of the chamber, still holding his worn leather bag. He felt very small, surrounded by so many alien beings, but he was not afraid. He had spent his entire life preparing for this moment, even if he had not known it. Grand Counselor Thexanara sat on the highest seat, looking down at Tejo with eyes that glowed like purple fire. She was ancient beyond imagination, her silver skin marked with patterns that told the history of 1,000 worlds. When she spoke, her voice echoed through the chamber like distant thunder. Human scholar, she said, you have invoked an ancient right that has not been used since before many of these species reached the stars. You claim that our methods of expansion violate our fundamental laws. Present your evidence. Tejo opened his notebook and looked up at the thousands of alien faces staring down at him. Some looked curious, others angry, and many seemed bored. They had seen challengers before, and all of them had failed. Honorable counselors, Tejo began, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber's acoustics. I have spent the last 3 days studying your legal database. What I found surprised me. He activated the projection device they had given him. Ancient text appeared in the air above his head, glowing softly in the chamber's dim light. This is the original Galactic Compact, written in ancient Velthari over 5,000 years ago. It established the first laws for interaction between species in this galaxy. Murmurs ran through the assembled representatives. Many of them had never seen the original document. It was considered a historical curiosity, not something that affected modern policy. According to Section 7 of the Compact, Tejo continued, reading from his notes, trial by combat may only be used to resolve disputes between existing members of the galactic community. It specifically states that combat trials cannot be used for territorial expansion or subjugation of new species. Kral Vorthak stood up from his seat in the war faction section. Ancient laws have no bearing on modern reality. The galaxy has changed. Has it? Tejo asked. He gestured and new text appeared in the air. According to Section 12 of the Fundamental Codes, no law in the Galactic Compact can be changed without unanimous agreement from all member species. When was that vote taken? The chamber fell silent. Several counselors began whispering urgently to their advisors. Rilvok, the sympathetic alien official who had supported Tejo in the arena, stood from his seat. I have reviewed the records, he announced. No such vote has ever been taken. The war faction has been operating under assumed authority for over 1,000 years. Grand Counselor Thexnara's purple eyes narrowed. These are serious accusations, human. Do you have proof that our recent expansions violated these ancient laws? Tejo smiled. This was the moment he had been preparing for. I do, Honorable Counselor. But first, let me ask a question. How many species have been conquered through trial by combat in the last 1,000 years? 17, answered High Arbitrator Velthus. And how many of those species were already members of the galactic community before the trials? Velthus hesitated. None. They were all newly contacted species. Which means, Tejo said, his voice growing stronger, every single one of those conquests was illegal under your own fundamental laws. The chamber erupted in chaos. Representatives shouted at each other in dozens of different languages. Some demanded immediate investigation. Others called for Tejo to be silenced. From Earth, Zhang So-young, the planet's ambassador, spoke through Tejo's communicator. Tejo, you're doing amazingly. The whole world is watching. Keep going. Grand Counselor Thexanara raised her hand, and the chamber gradually became quiet. Human, even if your interpretation of the law is correct, what do you propose we do about it? The conquered species have been integrated into our society for generations. I propose, Tejo said firmly, that all 17 species be granted immediate independence and full membership in the Galactic Council. Their conquests were illegal, so their subjugation is also illegal. Kral Vorthak roared with anger. Impossible. This would destroy the order we have built. The order you built was based on breaking your own laws, Tejo replied. Real order comes from following justice, not ignoring it. Elder Mordak, the ancient alien who had spoken up during the trial, slowly rose from his seat. His voice was weak with age, but it carried the weight of centuries. I was present when the war faction first began using combat trials for expansion, he said. Even then, some of us questioned whether it was legal. But we were told the laws had been updated. We were lied to. More counselors began standing, some supporting Elder Mordak's statement, others shouting in protest. The chamber was dividing into factions before Tejo's eyes. There is more, Tejo said, raising his voice to be heard over the argument. I found evidence of something called the Liberation Clause in the ancient laws. New text appeared in the air. This time in several different languages so all the representatives could read it. If a species can prove that galactic law has been violated in the conquest of other worlds, those worlds must be freed immediately, and the species that provided the proof becomes a founding member of a reformed council. The chamber went completely silent. Even Kral Vorthak stopped shouting and stared at the ancient text floating above Tejo's head. Grand Counselor Thexnara leaned forward in her seat. You understand what you are asking for, human? You want to dismantle a system that has brought stability to this galaxy for 1,000 years. I want to replace an illegal system with a legal one. Tejo corrected. Stability built on injustice is not really stability at all. It's just delayed chaos. He thought about his library back on Earth, about all the books he had read about civilizations that fell because they forgot their founding principles. A society that ignores its own laws will eventually destroy itself. I'm offering you a chance to fix the problems before they become catastrophic. Rilvok stood again. I support the humans' proposal. The war faction has grown too powerful by operating outside legal authority. It is time to return to the principles that founded our galactic community. More representatives began standing in support. Not all of them, but enough to matter. Species that had always felt uncomfortable with the conquest system finally had a legal basis to oppose it. Kral Vorthak and his supporters were outnumbered, but they were not giving up easily. Even if the ancient laws support this madness, he snarled, how do we know this human can be trusted? How do we know Earth will not become as aggressive as we have been? Tejo looked up at the war faction leader and smiled. Because I'm not a warrior, Commander Vorthak. I'm a librarian. My job is to preserve knowledge and share it with others. Earth doesn't want to conquer other worlds. We want to learn from them. He gestured to his notebook. Everything I've discovered here will be shared freely with all species in the galaxy. The ancient laws, the legal precedents, the historical records, all of it. Knowledge belongs to everyone. Grand Counselor Thexanara was quiet for a long time, studying Tejo with her ancient purple eyes. Finally, she spoke. The evidence presented is compelling. The legal arguments are sound. The Liberation Clause is indeed part of our fundamental law. She paused, and her next words changed the galaxy forever. I hereby declare that all conquests made through illegal combat trials are null and void. The 17 conquered species are granted immediate independence and full council membership. The chamber exploded with cheers from some sections and angry shouts from others. But Grand Counselor Thexanara was not finished. Furthermore, she continued, in accordance with the Liberation Clause, humanity is granted founding membership in the reformed Galactic Council. The war faction is disbanded and their leaders will face trial for violating fundamental galactic law. Kral Vorthok and his supporters stormed out of the chamber, but they were greatly outnumbered now. The majority of the council had voted for justice over conquest. 2 months later, Tejo sat in his library on Earth, which was now much larger than before. The Galactic Council had provided funding to expand it into a center for interspecies research and legal study. Representatives from dozens of worlds came to study there, learning about the history and laws that governed their galaxy. The 17 freed worlds had formed a new alliance with Earth, sharing technology and knowledge freely. Zextar the Bone Crusher had actually visited Earth, wanting to learn about the military tactics that had defeated him. He was now studying to become a strategist rather than just a warrior. Tejo looked up from the ancient galactic text he was translating as his brother Minho entered the library. Any regrets about becoming the most famous librarian in the galaxy? Minho asked with a smile. Tejo thought about the question seriously. He had saved his world not through violence but through knowledge. He had freed 17 species not through conquest but through law. He had changed the entire galactic order not through war but through wisdom. No regrets, he said finally.